14-year-old Harley Dilly was on his way to school. It was the last day before vacation, and he was furious with his parents. The night before, he had gotten into a huge fight with them, and as punishment, they had confiscated his phone. That afternoon, Harley did not come home. So his parents called the school to say, hey, have you seen our son? And they said, well, we know he was here today, but we don't know where he went after that. So the parents called some of Harley's friends, and none of his friends had seen him after school. His parents were worried, but they had seen this kind of behavior before. When Harley got really mad, he had a history of running away from the house and staying out overnight. He usually crashed with some friend, and they would cover for him, or sometimes he would even sleep in abandoned buildings. And so that day, the police were not called. The next day, when Harley still didn't show up, the parents started to get a little bit more worried, and because their son didn't even have his phone, they had no way of getting in touch with him. And so they finally said, we got to go to the police. And so the police launched a formal search for him, and right away there was no leads. Nobody knew where he was. Weeks went by, and the family was putting up posters all over town, telling their son that you're not in trouble, please come home. And everybody in the community is out there looking for Harley, but there was just no sign of him. Finally, almost a month after he had gone missing, the police received a tip. The house across the street from Harley's house was a vacant home because the owners were actually renovating the property, so they weren't living there. But they had cameras set up on the outside, and one of their cameras, when they reviewed it, picked up Harley walking towards their property on the day he went missing. The police go inside, they're yelling for Harley, they check all the doors and all the windows, and everything is locked. There's no sign of a break-in. They go upstairs, and in one of the bedrooms, they see there's a jacket lying on the ground, and it would turn out to be Harley's. It was the same one he had on when he went missing. And next to the jacket on the ground is this weird metal plate. And so after seeing this, the police believe Harley must be up on the second floor somewhere. He must have been hiding out in this vacant house the whole time. They don't know how he got in, but clearly this is his stuff. And so they start yelling for him and walking around the second floor, and it's silence. There's no sign of Harley. And so they go back in the room where his jacket and this plate is, and they look up on the wall, and pretty high up, there's a hole in the wall. And it looks to be about the same size as this metal plate. And they realize this plate is actually a vent cover, and that is a vent. Suddenly, police believe this could be a lot more sinister, that perhaps someone had harmed Harley and then taken evidence and stuffed it into a vent inside of a vacant house. So one of the officers gets a stool, they put it in front of this vent, they climb on top, and they reach in to feel around for more evidence. And as soon as they reach in, they touch something and they pull their hand back out and they say, there's a person in there. And it would turn out the person inside of there was Harley, and he was deceased. Although no one knows exactly what happened to Harley, the leading theory is he climbed onto the roof of this vacant home on the day he went missing, and he looked down the chimney. There was no cap on it, and from his perspective, it looked like he'd be able to fit all the way down to the bottom. But what he didn't know was this chimney was wider at the top, and then as it went down, it got narrower and narrower and narrower, and in fact, the most narrow section towards the lower half, he never could have got through. This was an impossible thing he was trying to do. But regardless, he went in feet first, and he began making his way down, and then about the halfway point, he started to get stuck. And he believed it was because of his big, bulky jacket. And as it happened, he was right in front of this hole in the wall, which was the vent, and so he managed to punch the metal plate off of the vent. He got his jacket off, and he forced it through this hole, thinking that would give him a little bit more room. And it did. He began to sink a little bit further, and then he decides to put both arms over his head to try to make himself as narrow as possible. And it works. He starts to move down, but at some point, he gets completely stuck. And he's struggling to breathe because the chimney is tight in his chest, and he's got his arms over his head, and he's starting to panic, and he lets out a scream. But as soon as he does that, the air coming out of his lungs causes his chest to compress, and he sinks just a little bit lower into that tight section of the chimney. And as soon as he comes to a stop, he tries to breathe back in again, but his chest can no longer expand to its full size, so he can't get a full breath. And so over and over and over again, as he's screaming and yelling for help, he's compressing his chest and sinking farther and farther into this inescapable trap until he reaches a point where he cannot go any lower, and his chest is crushed by the chimney. He can barely catch his breath. His arms are stuck over his head, and his feet are dangling off the ground, and that is how he would stay until he suffocated to death.